social media messaging, information warfare, and spy balloons. Our next guests say these are just some of the weapons the Chinese Communist Party has used against the United States. But has the U.S. helped a vulnerable enemy weaken the strength of our country? In a special episode of Capitol Report tonight, we speak with the authors of Embracing Communist China about their new book. It delves into the history of the political power competition between the United States and the communist regime. Thank you so much for joining.
It's our pleasure. Thank you for having us.
Really appreciate it.
Your book, extremely fascinating read. It's no secret that China poses a great threat, communist China. Embracing Communist China is the title of your book. Try to tell the audience, what are the root problems facing us that have gotten us into this situation? Jim.
Yeah, the thesis is basically twofold. One is that the United States national security community and every administration up until Trump failed to recognize the inherent threat of the Chinese Communist Party and their grand strategy to dominate the world and displace the United States. In addition to that, because we didn't recognize that threat, we also, therefore, did not prepare to defend ourselves against that threat. And those are the two major theses that form what the real problem has been and where we're at today, is that we failed to recognize a threat and then we failed to act to defend ourselves against that threat. And now we find ourselves behind the eight ball.
Bradley, how big of a threat is China?
It's an existential threat to the United States, and it was one, as we argue in the book, that the United States made. 30 years ago, we defeated the Soviet Union, and yet 30 years hence, right, we have a new peer competitor, a state which is growing militarily, its nuclear capabilities, its conventional capabilities, air, land, sea, cyber, obviously new weapons systems that they've developed, diplomatically, scientifically, technologically, in their diplomacy with the Belt and Road and so many other initiatives. We've got a peer competitor on our hands, and the book asks, how did that happen? And the answer is, well, Deng Xiaoping had a great strategy. His strategy was he was going to make Wall Street a partner in the CCP. Deng Xiaoping was going to make American business and investors partners in the Chinese Communist Party. And he did so, and American businesses went full-throated into the People's Republic of China with disastrous consequences. So we argue it's embracing communist China, but that was America's greatest strategic failure. 30 years ago, we were dominant. We had just defeated the Soviet Unions. 30 years hence, right, we have this formidable existential threat, which is seeking to not only replace the United States in international politics, but also targeting Americans through cyber, but also physical means with their weaponry and with cyber weapons, as well as others too.
Jim, to the point that you made and Bradley just made, even on Capitol Hill, we still see lawmakers unwilling to call China an adversary, an enemy. Meanwhile, our critical infrastructure is under attack through cyber threats. The list can go on. First of all, why aren't we recognizing them as such, and how important is it that we do?
Well, the reason that we haven't recognized them is, as Brad stated, is we had people that were invested in engaging with China economically. And so over the last 40 years, since Deng opened up their economy to some market reforms, we started sending our companies over there, taking jobs from America and sending them and investing these big corporations in the PRC. So after all that time, the leadership of those companies, they make money there. That's their cash cow. And so they're not inclined to walk away from that. And in the government sector, you had think tanks, you had government agencies that were also kind of ideologically inclined towards this belief system that if we just engage a bit more with the PRC, that things would get better and they would normalize themselves and we could have an global international order. But no one ever stopped and did kind of a check and say, well, we've been engaging, have things gotten better or not? We didn't really assess ourselves. So we didn't have any as Secretary Pompeo talked about, blind engagement. We were blind in our engagement, and nobody ever said, let's account for the engagement and see if it's actually being effective. So that's kind of where we're at today, is that was the predominant system of our government and our business community for 40 years. And then Donald Trump comes in with his team of people that were more realistic about and understanding the threat from the Chinese Communist Party, and they were the first administration of Democrat or Republican that said, hold on a minute, these guys are a strategic competitor. And now you're seeing language from the Biden administration since last year when Tony Blinken went to China with all these other cabinet level secretaries. It culminated in the Xi Biden meeting in San Francisco. They're now talking about a period of intense diplomacy so that we can restore cooperation. We will cooperate where we can and compete where we must. But they put the emphasis always on cooperation. So it's really a return to the engagement school.
Brad, the mainstream media likes to focus on some of Trump's comments in passing without much context, saying that he cozies up to dictators. They focus on how he says he's friends with Xi Jinping. Talk to us about the policies that made the Trump administration different when it comes to China.
The Trump administration was different fundamentally because they identified the Chinese Communist Party for what it was, and that was a great power competitor, as they termed it, right? We would say an enemy of the United States, but they chose great power competitor, which was a very positive step forward in recognizing the Chinese Communist Party for what it was. So the Trump administration deserves kudos for making that very significant change. And Jim knows very well it's very difficult to change the U.S. government. Language matters, and that was a very big key step forward. But also in trade, the Trump administration also recognized, of course, that American manufacturing was hurt by this, so there were a series of trade policies, of course. And then military strength was a third pillar, where the United States recognized its nuclear arsenal was not what it needed to be, and the Trump administration made progress there, as well as in conventional weapons too, to match the aggressive nature of the Chinese Communist Party. So there were many steps that the Trump administration took, if you will, to turn the rudder. I'll borrow a nautical metaphor from my Navy colleague, to turn the rudder of the ship of state. And great progress was made, and the vulnerability of Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party was acute. But sadly, as Jim has argued, Biden administration is making the return to the old regime, the return to engagement, that terribly flawed policy.
Jim, anything you'd like to add to that?
No, I'm in total agreement with Brad on this, is that we really, for the first time, with that Trump administration, broke this intellectual lock on how we viewed the People's Republic of China and the Chinese Communist Party. And by doing that, it set in motion so many things, like inside the Defense Department, you started having, analysis of the PRC in terms as it being a strategic competitor, not an engagement partner. And so that really fundamentally changed our mindset, but we didn't get enough time to be able to then start implementing those changes. We had a decline in the size of the U.S. Navy. I joined the Navy in 1986. We had almost 600 ships. And when I retired in 2015, we had 287. So we were declining while the Chinese Navy was rising. They have over 350 ships. And each year the Congressional Research Service would put out a report and say, here's how many ships the U.S. Navy has, and here's how many the Chinese have. And those numbers were known to people in Washington, in the Pentagon, and the Hill, and yet we didn't do anything to change it. And it was only when Trump and his team came in, they said, hey, we have to stop the decline of the size of the U.S. Navy, and we need to reverse that. And they were starting to reverse it, and then, he had obviously a lot of challenges every day in other areas, and the system itself was resisting him. But the idea that we need to grow our conventional and nuclear power, in addition to these other domains of information, economy, and whatnot, are also important. But we need to have conventional hard power that we don't have today in order to be able to, one, deter anybody from attacking America, let alone our interests in Asia and around the world.
To that point, Jim, I want to get your thoughts on sort of the effect that the policy of engagement has led to with our allies in the Indo-Pacific.
Well, I'll speak first on that, and Brad will probably have something, but in terms of my experience, what I noticed, and I'll go back to an incident in 2012 at Scarborough Shoal in the South China Sea. It was inside the exclusive economic zone of the Republic of the Philippines, about 140 miles from Manila, a shoal, just barely rising above the water at a low tide, but at an average tide, you couldn't even see it. That shoal was where Filipinos fishermen had been fishing for centuries, or 100 plus years. And in 2012, the Chinese got upset about the Filipinos inspecting Chinese vessels that were inside their shoal, stealing their clams and coral reef and things of that nature and fish. And the Chinese sent a bunch of ships there. And in the period of April to June of 2012, the Obama administration, with Secretary Clinton as the Secretary of State, and Kurt Campbell, the new Deputy Secretary of State, then was the East Asia Security Affairs for State Department. They basically walked away from our ally, our treaty ally. We have a mutual defense treaty with the Republic of the Philippines, and we basically allowed China to take that shoal. And when that happened, it sent a signal in Tokyo, in Seoul, in Hanoi, in Canberra. It sent a signal throughout the Western Pacific that we may not be able to trust the United States to uphold its commitments, because maybe the U.S. government is still more interested in engaging with the PRC than they are with maintaining the security conditions of the Western Pacific, which has been, since World War II, very, in a sense, peaceful and relatively calm compared to other areas of the world over that 70, 80-year period.
Thank you for watching the Capitol Report. If you want to see our full broadcast, check us out at epochtv.com.